welcome back to the RBL Podcast. We've been away for a good few weeks. The off season has happened, the draft has concluded, free agency has landed. We've even had all of our preseason games, and as of today, we are now entering sort of the weeks of the regular season, with the first set of games being played today. And this is an episode that actually we've been planning for a little while, but getting things together takes a bit of time. But I'm really glad to say that it's not just me today rambling on about the RBL and what I think. I have a guest, a really good guest lined up for you guys, and that is Van the Red, the Indiana Pacers owner, general manager. Van the Red, great to have you on the show. How's your season looking so far?
Great to be here, and I appreciate the offer to come on.
Great, good stuff. It's great to have you on. It's great to have some different voices for people to listen to other than my British accent just rambling on about basketball. So thank you very much for coming on. And I think what would be quite good, Van, is if we talk a little bit about what we kind of asked each other to kind of do before we did this episode. And I'll give the framing, and then you can dive in with how you thought about it. But we kind of said to each other over the off season, it'd be great, really cool, and if we essentially did a little bit of a podcast on who we think are the top 10 most interesting players going into the season. And that was it. We kind of left it there. And as you would expect, I've gone off a completely different tangent. Van has gone off on a completely different tangent. But Van, do you want to take us through just your thinking of interesting players and where you kind of started looking and thinking about it?
Exactly, and I'm thrilled that we had different criteria for it. I went through each of the 22 teams in our league and looked at who I thought would be the player that would be sort of a swing player, determining whether the team wins or loses. I had tried for the most part to stay away from the superstars, but as you'll see as we go through it, there were a couple teams where I couldn't do anything other than to say, as this person goes, so goes the team.
Yeah, and I went a completely different route. I decided that because we're in free agency, I was going to talk about 10 free agents. Either they've stayed with their team or moved from their team that I think are interesting, just to see how they adapt to new surroundings, or maybe if they've come back to the team, what the expectations are. Are they higher now? They've signed big contracts and so on. But yeah, I mean, and let's just dive straight into it. I mean, we've got to talk about. I think let's jump straight over to Portland and talk a little bit about Trailblazers, because they've had a really interesting off season, and I'm going to jump in and give you my interesting player for this team, and it's got to be Randy Smith. Randy Smith has signed over from Buffalo on a big contract, 6 years, $300,000 in salary, so he is coming in to be a primary guy on this team. And he's kind of out in the pastures of Buffalo last year. They kind of lingered around the playoff spots and then sort of faded away, and well, he's coming into this to basically be the real number 2 player in this team. I think Maurice Lucas is sort of the glue. Bill Walton is obviously the star, but Randy Smith is meant to be the guy who's going to basically make this all happen. It's where the Trailblazers are coming from. So for me, I think it's going to be very interesting to just see, can he live up to that hype? Can he live up to that contract? Is he really one of these top all-star players that maybe we didn't necessarily see all of that in Buffalo? We saw him put up points, wasn't particularly efficient. Can he really take that leap and really take this team into contender status?
I love it. I think he's going to be critical. Anytime you see a player movement like that, you always want to see whether the inefficiency in the previous place was because the team didn't live up to him, or if that's just because he's an inefficient player. And I agree that will definitely make or break it. This is one of the 2 teams on my list where I did go with the superstar, though, because I think the back half of the Smith deal, given his age, might be kind of grim. So the question is Bill Walton ready to defend Kareem in the playoffs so they can collect some chips before Smith starts to decline?
Yeah, I mean, like I talked a lot about Bill Walton in the playoffs last year, and how him sort of being injured and then coming back, and how much strain Maurice Lucas basically had to put on this team probably meant that they kind of didn't really kind of get to the expectation I think that was set of this team. And hopefully he stays healthy this year. His numbers are already looking good in sort of the 2 games that the Trailblazers have played initially. So yeah, it is about keeping Bill Walton healthy. I completely agree with that, Trailblazers. I guess the question before we move on to our next team and next set of players, do you think that the Trailblazers with Bill Walton are good enough to beat the Lakers?
It's definitely a big three, and then support team between Lucas, Walton, and Smith. I think if those three are healthy and Smith is more efficient in a better ecosystem, I think they are absolutely good enough. But those are some big ifs.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's move on to another team. We're going to be jumping around all across the conferences here and all across the divisions. We don't have a set order for this, guys, as you would expect. But let's talk a little bit about the Pistons. And for me, the one that was really interesting, because this was probably our first big name free agency move in the off season, and that is Mickey Johnson. So anyone who is following the Pistons over last year, they started really strongly. They made a bunch of trades to essentially retool this team. They had a really great playoffs. I mean, they really almost went all the way. And the question really was, what are they going to do with some of this cap space, some of this draft assets that they have? They managed to bring it Mickey Johnson over from Chicago, so a local sort of rivalry move there. And for me, it's going to be interesting seeing how he pairs against Lanier, because on paper, I really like this pairing. You've got Lanier, who is obviously the post juggernaut. He's going to continue to put up amazing numbers. Mickey Johnson is sort of this versatile sort of shooting power forward, sort of stretch forward, I would say. Although we don't really have a 3-point line at the moment. So can they really do the yin yang front court dynamic duo that we see from other teams? Is that going to be enough to take this Pistons team back into the playoffs and then back into contention? I mean, I'm going to be really excited to see how that plays out. You know, that to me is the one that I was interested in from the Pistons. But I don't know if did you have Johnson or did you have someone else from the Pistons?
It's actually a very related point, but I did not have him. I think between Johnson and Lanier, this team is going to be one of the most bruising, dangerous post teams in the league. The question I had as I looked over that roster is who's going to give them space to operate. So I settled on Kevin Porter. He played superbly last year, but I think they need his shot to create space and his passing to create the motion necessary to have two guys survive in the post. Um, so for me, it was Kevin Porter on this team.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I like the move of Kevin Porter to the shooting guard position as well, because that basically freed up Eric Money to come in and just have this really, really good season last year. He's been sort of linguished back down to the bench now in terms of money so far, so we'll see sort of how that plays out. But yeah, Kevin Porter is definitely a very important piece for the Pistons. Let's keep moving on. Let's talk a little bit about the Kings, because the Kings are clearly in the position of probably trying to rebuild this year, going in all in for this elite draft class that we're kind of starting to see the shining bits on now. But they obviously made a whole host of free agency moves, and the one that really stood out to me was Mr. Tom Henderson. So Tom Henderson was probably one of the most competed free agents this year. I want to say at one stage when I looked, he almost had like 10 offers across the league. So for a guy who is on paper, he's not a superstar. He is a solid point guard, I would say. Good defensive ability, good passing ability. His shooting numbers, despite being pretty awful last year, should be better than what's on the paper last year. And he goes to the Kings on sort of a 1 year, $250,000 deal really. So he turned down sort of multiple year offers, maybe a little bit less money for contenders. I know I bidded for him at one stage. The Lakers did, the Spurs did, I think the Pistons did. I think even your Pacers might have done at one point, Van. But there was
Absolutely, yeah.
a lot of teams lingering around for him. So to me, $250,000 is a lot of money to pay for someone like Tom Henderson. He's probably not going to get that contract again unless he has an absolutely mind-blowing season this year. And to me, the Kings are obviously rebuilding. His numbers are going to look pretty good this year because he's going to play heavy minutes. And I'm just really interested to see whether he goes into next offseason and gets the same sort of money, or whether he finally signs that longer term deal with a team that maybe is going to keep him around for the longer period. But yeah, that's the one for me for the Kings. But what did you have when you looked at the Kansas City Kings?
Well, I thought the Henderson deal was fascinating, and I thought it was a nice piece of GM work to pick up a person who might give this a reasonable ecosystem for their younger players to develop in. I agree; he's not likely to see that money again, but good for him to get that. And on this one, I have to say I cheated a little bit because I think the most important thing for the Kings this year is how the lottery balls fall. this is not going to be a great team. And I think their fan base is going to be watching a lot of college basketball and looking for the next year. So the Kings' most important player is the lottery balls.
Yeah, how they fall is definitely going to be interesting for the Kings, and let's not even discuss the fact that they could possibly end up with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird if it falls some way. We're all going to be doomed at that point, I think. But yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how the Kings do, what they play, what lineups they do, because I think they're going to play and tweak a lot of things, and I think they're going to be really active in the trade market because they're guys like Henderson, Foots Walker, Tom Owens. I know is being shopped. Steve Horse. These are guys who are not, they're not going to be elite title-winning players, but they are good pieces for playoff teams come that time to nab. So I could see this entire roster changing probably, but by the time we get to the trade deadline. But yeah, let's jump.
Absolutely, I would not be surprised if we get to the trade deadline, and the only player on this team likely to still be there is Landsberger.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jeff Judkins might still be around, given he's a rookie and going to have a nice contract for a little while. But yeah, I kind of agree with you.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about the Houston Rockets now. We are definitely jumping around the league. This one, I'm sorry, but I had to do this one. This was just an obvious banker, had to be discussed on a podcast at some point, and that is Moses Malone. So again, going from Henderson to Moses Malone is slightly different, but in terms of he was massively bidded for, I think again he definitely had the most offers and the most sizable offers across the league. Everyone who had cap space was trying to get Moses Malone. And also let's call out the Spurs, who also tried a cheeky $90,000 deal to see if they can land him. That was pretty ambitious, I have to say. But yeah, Moses Malone, he's an absolute superstar. He's back. He's got the massive deal that he probably wanted. He is now. The question now for me is, he is now the man in Houston. Is he the man that can take this team to a title? He's got the pieces around him. He's got Lucas Reed, Tom Janovich. He's got really really nice pieces around him. Can he be that guy? He's 23. He's basically going to spend pretty much all of his career now in Houston, unless something drastic happens. His numbers have obviously already been off the chart this season in the 3 games he's played. And for me, I'm going to be looking at that going, they're even going to be sitting there going, this was the best bit of business we've ever done. Moses Malone has become better than Kareem, better than Gervin, better than anyone else we can think of.
Right.
Or it could, depending on the cap situation, could hinder them going forward, because looking at the contract situation for him is particularly enlightening, because by the end of that he's going to be paid about $600,000, which in today's money looks like that could be half of the salary cap. So who knows where we go in terms of that, but yeah, for me, Moses Malone is the interesting one in Houston. Did you go for the star, or did you go for someone else?
I am right with you with Moses Malone. I think basketball, more than any of the other major sports, is about who's the best player in the world, with 5 people on the court at a time, as opposed to 11 on the pitch or what have you. I think Moses has a chance to be the best player in the world. I think he's probably one of the top 3 players already. He has signed up for 6 years. With the salary cap and the individual salary cap, those max players either return surplus value at a rate that no one else can in basketball, or they're a complete anchor. I think there's very little chance he's an anchor, but I think he could be the player that makes the Rockets for the entirety of that deal, and I can't wait to see how he does with that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let's not forget he's only 23 years old as well, so he still has growth room, which is frightening.
Yeah, he has growth room, and he will not even be late prime when this contract is over. So, this could be the best contract in the league.
It definitely be. Let's keep going on. One team that I want to talk about, and I know it's a team that is currently under sort of the computer, but they had an interesting offseason, the San Diego Clippers. Not only did they change name, but the roster has sort of flipped around a little bit. And the player that I was interested in talking about here was Elmore Smith. So Elmore Smith I think he had a few different offers. He's obviously moved over from Cleveland, but I think I'm interested to see how he pairs up against this team, because on paper that front court is pretty much log jammed. They've got Elmore Smith, Sven Nater, Wayne Cooper coming in as a rookie, and then obviously you got Billy Knight sort of in the wing position. So the backcourt looks pretty atrocious outside of Ron Boone, pretty much. But I'm interested to see how the likes of Elmore Smith and Sven Nater actually play together. Will they play together? Which it looks like they are at the minute, or do they back them? I mean, is he going to put up some of the better numbers than when he did in Cleveland? I thought it was just an interesting move by the AI to just go and get another sizable contract in sort of the front court for this team. But yeah, what did you think of the Clippers and Smith, or did you have someone else in your interesting pile?
This was the other one where we overlapped, and a back-to-back people for me to discuss who decided they did not want to play their basketball in Indiana this offseason, because those were my priorities 1 and 2 this year, and neither one of them wanted it. I agree. It looks like they'll be trying to run a twin tower system with Smith and Nader. That can be beautiful, but it takes passing and compromise. Can they coexist? Could they even thrive together? There's not, like you said, there's not much spacing on that team. Billy Knight and Mike Glenn are going to have to really shoot to get them spacing. And between those two and Cooper, I think they're probably the team in the league most primed to make a big for small trade to try to balance that roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think the disappointing thing is I think it's going to stun Wayne Cooper's development, and he has some development room to probably turn into a pretty solid player in this league. And I mean, if anything's to go by at the minute, he's not started any games this season, so we could end up looking at his career trajectory kind of already going downhill at this point. So yeah, let's see what the AI does with the Clippers. Um, yeah, let's move on to talk about the Jazz. So the Jazz have had a difficult start this season, but I quite like their free agency pickup of Scott Wedman. He had a really good year in Atlanta. Really kind of came in and gave John Drew that kind of additional firepower support mechanism that he probably needed in Atlanta. He obviously jumped ship over to the Jazz. The Jazz offered him a pretty decent contract. His numbers are really looking pretty good this year, and I'm really interested to see how he pairs against with the likes of Pete Maravich, Rich Kelly. How that three are going to operate together, because I really like that. They've got spacing, balance, different skill sets between the three of them. So for me, I know the Jazz have started 0-5, which I did definitely not expect that. But the question for me is Wedman going to be enough to put this team back into playoff contention?
I think Wedman's a great player and he's a good fit with everybody. But I think he's a floor raiser more than a ceiling raiser. And I think that team's future revolves around the question of what does Pistol Pete Maravich have left at 31? He's the only creator on the team. But if you're going to go and be a heliocentric team, that's a pretty bright sun to put everyone else around. So I think that's the question that I was left with after looking over the Jazz roster.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll see if they've had a lot of injuries last year. So maybe if they can stop the injury issues that they were having, that'll certainly help them this year. But let's jump over to the Phoenix Suns. And it was one of the returning players actually I noted as interesting, which was Brian Winters. So I talked a little bit about one of the podcasts previously about Brian Winters and the high price it was paid to kind of get him over from Milwaukee. A couple of first round picks. He is one of the best shooters in the league. There's no doubt about that. He probably will end up being one of the better ones when the 3-point line kind of opens up. His numbers have looked really good this year. For me, the question is, can he take that leap from being that 18-20 point scorer to maybe that, I say this, but he's not going to get to George Gervin levels, but if he can get closer to George Gervin levels of 28, 25 points per game, that might be enough to get the Suns out of this doldrum of sort of being a non-playoff team and maybe up there, because you tie him with Paul Westphal in the backcourt, there's probably the best shooting backcourt in the league. And on paper, adding out Alex English, is you've got three really dynamic scorer wing guards set up there. So for me, it's Brian Winters was the interesting one for the Suns.
I love that we had the exact same question. I think with Alvin Adams and Paul Westphal, you have almost a surplus of playmaking. What that team needs is someone to, like you said, become a 28 plus point per game scorer. But I looked at Alex English on that team, and I think he's the one with the best chance on the team of being a top 5 scorer in the league. And if he is that, then that is a serious playoff contender.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a real difficult team to defend against if they've got all that scoring around and then an elite scorer. It just creates nightmares for pretty much anyone. Let's jump over to Seattle, and I mean, Seattle had a very interesting offseason as well. They made a few different acquisitions. I could talk a little bit about, is Dennis Johnson going to make the move up, or how's that going to look? But for me, it is one player, and that is Doug Collins. So Doug Collins came over on a decent deal, 6 years, big money. He had a good season in New Orleans. The question for me is Doug Collins going to be enough to take this team into contender status? Because on paper, the Seahawks are the Seattle Supersonics are one of the getting the sports wrong there, completely wrong. The Supersonics are one of the better playoff teams, I would say, normally on paper. They've got some good players. Dennis Johnson, as I said, is sort of making a step up. But if Doug Collins can, for the next couple of years, step into, I think, where they are playing, it was the right thing, which is a six-man style. I'm going to cover positions to point guard, shooting guard, maybe occasionally a bit of small forward in small ball lineups, and give you the shooting, bit of defense, some of that ability. If he can do that effectively, the question I have is, does that take the Supersonics into contender status from where they are at the moment?
This is another one where we had the same question but came up with different answers for it. I don't know what was off in 77. This was the team to me that underperformed its talent, which to me tells me it's a fit issue, not because there's absolutely no talent issues on this roster. So for me, it's Gus Williams. Since he's the point guard, it's a question of can he get the parts he has available to him humming much better than that engine did last year. Because I'm again, I don't know what was off with the Supersonics, but I think it's up to the floor leader, the point guard Gus Williams, to try to make that work, because that team should be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to add to that, obviously he only played 41 games last year, so he was injured. So hopefully, if they get 80 games out of him, that might help. He had a pretty atrocious injury length of 25 days and then 34 days with two separate injuries. So yeah, I agree. Gus Williams is the key cog in terms of taking that projection forward. If he can stay healthy, is the question. I'm going to jump over now to the Chicago Bulls and talk a little bit about them. So obviously they lost Mickey Johnson, big loss for them this year in free agency. They weren't able to retain him, but they've had an interesting offseason. They brought in obviously a couple of draft picks and so on. But for me, it's one player that probably I don't think most people would pick up as necessarily interesting. But I have it as an interesting player, not because of does he help them win, the usual sort of interesting question. I have him as, can this guy actually show some signs of being a good player in this league? And that is Austin Carr. He was in Cleveland last year. He was massively shopped pretty much everywhere. Nobody wanted him. He signed a cheap $30,000 deal for a couple of years with Chicago now. And, obviously in 76, prior to us starting the RBL, he had obviously one of these amazing seasons when the Cleveland had that great run in the playoffs. He hasn't really shown that in the RBL. He kind of didn't play many minutes last year. The question I have is, if they can give him more minutes, can he actually show signs of staying in the league really at this point? Because on paper, I've talked about him a little bit before. His shooting's pretty good. His passing handling's okay. His defense is okay. He's not a terrible player. He's just not a good player. So for me, Austin Carr, I'm going to be keeping an eye on that, see whether he can earn his way into the rotation, the Bulls, a little bit more than the 7 minutes or so he's had in the first 3 games.
Absolutely, I love a good comeback story. I think I'm the different guy for this team, and this is again almost going back to the well of best player, but with a little bit of a twist this time. And my player is Artis Gilmore. He's absolutely amazing. He's 7 years older than Mo Cheeks, though, and this looks to me like a team that is doing a teardown rebuild. They're with Gilmore, they're not quite bad enough to get the picks they need in the draft. Um, which for me, if I were the GM, I would be looking to trade Artis Gilmore for the best package I could get to speed the rebuild. So for me, I think Artis Gilmore is going to be the one that makes or breaks the season for the Bulls.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation because obviously with Mickey Johnson going, they lose a lot of talent and they probably go away from being a playoff contender team to, as you said, probably rebuilding now. Artis Gilmore, yeah, absolutely. He was in the MVP hunt last year, so no surprise that his numbers are already looking pretty good. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the Bulls will go this year. They're obviously 0-3 so far. Um, yeah, whether Gilmore gets traded on, I think that would have to be a hell of a move if someone can land him. Still got some good years left in him, definitely. So yeah, that's
Absolutely, and Jedi, if you do trade artists, call me.
yeah. I think he'll have his phone, his DMs off the hook basically from teams. I know there's a lot of teams that want that front court player because it's because of the era we're in. It's can we stop Kareem? Can we stop Gervin? And if you've got someone like Artis Gilmore, you kind of throw a completely different ball in the mix, don't you? Really.
Absolutely.
I'm going to end with another AI team at the moment, and that is the Denver Nuggets. And yeah, the Nuggets are interesting because they had such a strong start to the season last year, then continued, sort of then had a bit of a dip sort of at the trade deadline, end up in the playoffs, and on paper looked like a pretty solid team. You've got Dan Eisel and Brian Taylor kind of leading it, had some real good depth, and they obviously made the move this offseason to bring in Kevin Kennert, which when I looked at it, I was like, oh, this is a weird move because he's a guy who really hasn't been starting for Houston. He's played big minutes. He's basically just a defensive juggernaut. He's not going to do a lot other than rebound, defend, be a presence. And in Denver, he's actually come in and started, which is fascinating because he's being paired with Dan Eisel. So then I started to look at it a little bit more and I was like, well, actually, if you're thinking about it, you've got Dan Eisel, who's your scoring punch. You basically just need to get in the ball. And around him, what you need in that front court is just guys who are going to just be presence and going to be able to stop things. And if you've got Kevin Kennert, you've got Spencer Haywood, Lonnie Shelton, Tom Langard, you've got all that in an abundance. And Kevin Kennert is one of the guys that I think I didn't expect him to come in and start for the Nuggets. He has come in and started, and his numbers are looking pretty solid. And the reason that I'm glad we actually did this now rather than in the off season is because Dan Eisel's numbers in the first 4 games. I'm just going to throw this out there. He's played 40 minutes, 31 points per game, nearly not 10 rebounds now. His numbers have just been absolutely electric on really good shooting rating as well. His true shooting's been 600, so he has stepped up to, I would say at the moment, MVP level discussion. And maybe that's what the AI and Denver kind of were thinking was, if we can get guys like that with that presence in there, like I said, we can allow Dan Eisel to basically flourish. And if we allow Dan Eisel to flourish, we go from being a non-playoff team to being a good playoff team.
That's great. It's actually, this was the other one I cheated on because I just said TBD. I think Issel and Taylor are a fantastic foundation. Cooper was a great um, connecting piece they got in the draft this year, but they needed one more guy to round the team out. And I did not look at that roster and see Kunert as that player. But maybe you're right. Maybe he is the guy they needed. This was another of the teams I looked at and said, "Wow, they need a trade. They need one different player on that team." But if Kunert is the connecting piece between them, maybe they don't.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because the AI has also put Lonnie Shelton, who was on the Knicks at sort of a small forward, and I kind of pretty much played him at power forward, even though he's listed as small forward. So it's interesting they've basically gone sort of big in size, basically. So you've got Brian Taylor 6'2", Cooper 6'7", shooting guard, which is big for this era. Shelton is 6'8", Eisel 6'9", and you've got your 7-footer Kevin Kennert in there. So they've basically just gone big across the whole board, and be interested to see how it does for the Nuggets. But yeah, so that kind of brings us to a close in terms of the top 10 interesting players that we both had. We had a few
Do you mind
interesting
if I
ones.
throw out two more that? You mind if I throw out a couple more that I had that we
Yeah,
didn't
let's
quite get
go
to?
for it. Let's go for it. Who you got?
So the next team on my list was the Knicks, and my player was Ray Williams. I said from positions 2 through 5, the Knicks are tough. He's just in his second year, but he proved he was durable, and if his playmaking can improve on a sub 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, that this is a conference finalist team.
As
It's your team.
As the
What do
Knicks
you think
GM,
of the?
I pretty much agree with you.
Okay.
I pretty much agree. I like Ray Williams. I think he is obviously young. He's got some room to grow. His numbers were okay last year as a rookie, but yeah, I pretty much agree. I think if we can, it's kind of why I brought in Norm Van Leer is because I've got a bit of an insurance policy of a guy who can handle the
Yeah.
ball. In the event that I need to step back and give Williams more of a bench time, basically. But yeah, yeah, I'm interested to see how he makes that, if he can make that step forward.
Okay, two more quick ones. For the Celtics, I picked Dave Cowens. I really wanted to pick Michael Ray Richardson because I think he's the best player in the draft this year. But Cowens is the only center on that roster and is completely irreplaceable internally if he gets hurt. Can Cowens stay good until Michael Ray Richardson is ready to be the best player on the Celtics? Was my question there. And the quick last one was the Sixers. I picked Ricky Sobers, who started last year on my Pacers. He is not one of the five best players on the Sixers roster, but he is the best shooter on the roster, and somebody has to create space for Jones, Dawkins, McInnes, and Irving to operate.
Yeah, I mean, just let's jump back to the Celtics, and I mean they've had an amazing start to the season, by the way, 4-1. I did not expect that from the Celtics, so I think we're going for a bit of a retool. But yeah, Dave Cohen's, I agree, only centre on the list. Going to be interested to see if he can stay healthy, and he might have put up some really good numbers this year because he's got to play a lot of minutes. But yeah, Ricky Sobers, yeah, I talked about him on the podcast last year, and where is he going to fit? I think he is a six man. I think he can play 1 to 3, and his numbers are looking pretty good to start the season. The shooting numbers probably need to get up a little bit, but he's kind of doing the same thing they did last year, and I agree. I think he's the piece that allows the stars of the team to have their breaks, have their rest, so that he can just come in and basically just do a bit of everything, really.
Yep. Those are the players I had. Any GMs who listen to this and are curious who we had for your team, please put a note out there. I'm happy to share my list.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll come back to this at some point in the future. But before we have you head off, and thank you very much for joining this podcast. Let's talk a little bit about your team though, because we haven't really talked about the Pacers, and so I'm going to give you an interesting player on the Pacers, and then I'm just interested to hear what your view is for the team going forward, and what you're hoping to kind of get out of it. And so the one that I've got for you, really on paper, is Michael Thompson. And the reason I say this is because you've got, obviously there was a bit of activity last year. You managed to bring in Otis Birdsong with Adrian Dantley, but Michael Thompson is your big draft pick that you brought in. And for me, you talked a little bit about trying to find a centre and kind of was a bit unsuccessful with a few different free agency options. And I'm interested to see whether Michael Thompson can make that step up and be that third star on your team, because there's no doubt that Otis Birdsong is already a star. He's already putting up great numbers, and he's only in his second season. Adrian Dantley is already definitely a star, putting up really decent numbers. I'd say probably get his minutes up, and you kind of looking at a guy who's maybe looking at MVP discussion again, given that he played 33 minutes last year. But for me, it's Michael Thompson. If he can step up, be that defensive juggernaut, that inside presence, continue developing in that vein. If you can get him to let's just say a ballpark 20 and 10 guy, you're going to be laughing as a Pacers GM. So that's my interesting player for you. But your thoughts and reflections on the team and that interesting player opinion.
Oh, yeah, Thompson's definitely a swing guy for us. If he can be the third part of a big three with Otis Birdsong and Adrian Dantley, then I think we have the foundation set for some really good Pacers teams going forward. I did try to bring in some veteran centers, so I didn't throw him to the wolves and have to guard Artis Gilmore in his first week as a pro. That's pretty big ask of anybody. So hopefully we can get him on a little bit of a steady but slow development plan with that. But for me, the pivotal guy on the team was Eddie Jordan, who we picked up last year in a trade. I had thought Foots Walker would be our point guard going forward, but he found a bigger, better offer elsewhere and moved on. So the Butch Beard and Eddie Jordan are really the only natural point guards on the team. And Butch is too old to handle a full time role at this point in time. So to me, it's really is Eddie Jordan ready in his second year?
Yeah, that's another interesting one, and Yeah, he looked pretty solid last year. Actually, the shooting ability probably needs to get closer to his ratings, but yeah, on paper he looks like he could be a decent point guard going forward. Yeah, the Pacers. I guess it's going to be interesting to see how that all pairs together. But Van, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, and giving us your list of interesting players. And as you said, if anyone's interested in knowing who Van had as their interesting player on their team, if we didn't talk about your particular franchise today, drop a line in the conversation, and I'm sure, as he said, he'll come back and give it his view on your team and interesting players. But any final thoughts or reflections, Van, before we sign off and look ahead to week 2 on Sunday?
No, I am terribly excited for this season. Ready to see how things go. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat with you, and hope we can do it again fairly regularly.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll be back throughout the season to talk about. Well, we've got to at some point talk about this incredible draft that we've got in the off season. We've probably got to talk about some of the chaos that's happening throughout the season and teams going up and down, and I'm sure there'll be trades. So keep posted, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion on the podcast this season.
Sounds great. Thanks again for the opportunity.